What if I told you that beneath one of America's most iconic estates, hidden 400 feet underground, lies a secret so explosive that the CIA kept it classified for over 60 years? The Kennedy compound in Hyannisport has been the subject of countless conspiracy theories, but what was recently declassified goes beyond anything anyone imagined. Before we dive into this rabbit hole that changed history forever, make sure you hit that subscribe button because what you're about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about American power. The Kennedy estate has always been more than just a family retreat. Perched on the coast of Massachusetts, this sprawling property served as the summer White House during JFK's presidency. But while tourists snap photos from the water and historians document the surface story, something far more sinister was happening beneath their feet. For decades, rumors swirled about underground tunnels, secret meetings, and classified operations. The CIA dismissed these as conspiracy theories, until now. In early 2024, following a Freedom of Information Act request that had been tied up in legal battles since 1998, the CIA released a trove of documents that confirm what whistleblowers had been saying for years. There was indeed something beneath the Kennedy estate, something that required round-the-clock security, advanced engineering, and absolute secrecy. The declassified files reveal that construction began in 1956, years before JFK even announced his presidential campaign. This wasn't some Cold War bunker thrown together in a panic. This was planned, deliberate, and connected to operations that would shape global events for generations. The excavation itself was a feat of engineering that required cover stories within cover stories. Official records show that the Kennedy family was upgrading their sewage systems and reinforcing the coastal foundation against erosion. In reality, teams of workers with top-secret clearances were drilling 400 feet into the bedrock. The soil they removed was transported to 12 different locations across 3 states to avoid detection. Neighbors reported hearing construction sounds at odd hours, but anyone who asked too many questions received visits from men in dark suits who strongly encouraged them to mind their own business. What makes this discovery so profound isn't just that there was a secret facility. It's what that facility was designed to do. According to the declassified documents, the underground complex stretched over 40,000 square feet. That's nearly an acre of space carved into solid rock beneath the Atlantic coast. The facility had its own power generation, water purification, air filtration, and communication systems completely independent from any public grid. It could operate in total isolation for up to 18 months, but this wasn't designed as a survival bunker. The layout tells a different story. The complex was divided into 7 distinct sections, each serving a specific purpose that the CIA has only partially disclosed. Section A was a communications hub with direct encrypted lines to the Pentagon Langley, and something called Project Sentinel, which still remains classified. Section B housed what documents describe as a psychiatric evaluation and enhancement center, complete with medical equipment that was decades ahead of its time. Section C was a document storage facility with climate-controlled vaults. These weren't filing cabinets. These were hermetically sealed chambers designed to preserve materials for centuries. Section D is where things get truly disturbing. The declassified floor plans show a series of 12 identical rooms, each soundproofed and fitted with observation windows and recording equipment. The CIA's explanation? Enhanced interrogation training facilities, but former agents who have come forward tell a different story. These rooms were allegedly used for what was internally called perception management testing, experiments designed to understand how to control public opinion, manipulate memory, and create false narratives that entire populations would accept as truth. If this sounds like something out of a dystopian novel, remember that this was happening during the same era as MK Ultra, Operation Mockingbird, and dozens of other confirmed programs that once sounded too crazy to be true. Section E was a war room with maps covering every continent, dozens of telephone lines, and something the documents call strategic scenario modeling equipment. This is where decisions were reportedly made about covert operations in Cuba, Vietnam, the Congo, and countries most Americans couldn't find on a map. The Kennedy estate wasn't just a vacation spot. It was an off-the-books command center where plausible deniability was built into the architecture itself. If anything went wrong, if any operation was exposed, there was no official paper trail connecting it to government facilities. It was just a private family's basement. Section F contained sleeping quarters for up to 30 people, a full kitchen, recreational facilities, and even a small library. Whoever was working down there wasn't just visiting for a few hours. They were living in this underground city, possibly for weeks or months at a time. The personnel logs that were partially released show rotations of CIA officers, military intelligence analysts, scientists from various government laboratories, and several individuals whose names are completely redacted, but whose job titles include things like behavioral architect and narrative engineer. Section G is the one that changed everything. The CIA describes it simply as archival storage, but the inventory lists that were declassified reveal something extraordinary. This section contained original documents related to operations that officially never happened. There were files on regime changes that succeeded, regime changes that failed, assassinations that were carried out, assassinations that were planned but aborted, financial manipulations that triggered economic collapses in targeted nations, and media campaigns designed to shift public opinion on everything from wars to elections. One file that's generated intense scrutiny since declassification is labeled Operation Northern Star. The heavily redacted summary describes a long-term program to ensure continuity of strategic vision across multiple administrations regardless of which party held power. Translation: a shadow government infrastructure that operated beyond democratic oversight. The Kennedy family's involvement in this raises questions that historians are just beginning to explore. Was JFK fully aware of what existed beneath his family's property? Did he approve of these operations, or was he kept in the dark by the same intelligence apparatus that may have ultimately turned against him? Here's where the timeline gets interesting. Construction of the facility was completed in early 1961, just weeks before JFK's inauguration. Throughout his presidency, he made frequent trips to the Hyannisport compound, officially for rest and relaxation. But the visitor logs that were partially declassified show that during these visits, the president often met with individuals who held no official government positions. These weren't social calls. Flight records show private planes arriving at nearby airports, cars with government plates pulling up to the compound at midnight, and Coast Guard vessels establishing security perimeters around the property. In the months leading up to November 1963, activity at the underground facility intensified dramatically. Communication logs show encrypted messages being sent and received at all hours. Supply deliveries increased. The number of personnel with access to the facility doubled. Something big was being planned, or perhaps something big was being prepared for. After JFK's assassination, access to the facility became even more restricted. The CIA took direct control, and Kennedy family members were reportedly denied entry to certain sections of their own property. The facility remained operational throughout the 1960s and 70s, serving as a hub for operations across Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia. By the 1980s, advances in technology made the physical location less critical. Satellite communications and computer networks meant that intelligence work could be conducted from anywhere. The underground complex was gradually decommissioned, though certain sections remained active until 1994. The final decommissioning report describes a thorough sanitization process where equipment was removed, walls were stripped, and even the concrete was treated with chemicals to eliminate any trace evidence. But here's the question nobody's answering. If the facility was completely cleaned out in 1994, why did the CIA fight so hard to keep it classified for another 30 years? What's in those documents that's still redacted? The released files are estimated to represent less than 40% of the total material related to the facility. The rest remains classified under national security exemptions that cite ongoing operations and protection of intelligence methods. Independent researchers who have analyzed the declassified documents have identified references to at least 17 other similar facilities that may exist beneath private properties, corporate campuses, and even university grounds across the United States. The Kennedy estate wasn't unique. It was part of a network, a parallel infrastructure that allowed intelligence agencies to operate beyond the constitutional checks and balances that are supposed to govern them. The implications are staggering. How many decisions that shaped history were made in rooms that officially don't exist? How many events that we think we understand were actually orchestrated from these hidden command centers? The CIA's official statement on the declassification is carefully worded. They acknowledge the existence of the facility, describe it as a Cold War-era precaution, and insist that all activities conducted there were authorized under presidential findings and national security directives. They don't apologize, they don't express regret. They simply confirm what conspiracy theorists have been saying for decades. The government has secrets, big ones, and they're hidden in plain sight beneath some of America's most recognizable landmarks. What was found 400 feet beneath the Kennedy estate wasn't just tunnels and equipment. It was evidence of a shadow system that's been operating alongside our visible government for generations. The declassification doesn't close the book on this story. It opens it. Because now we know these facilities existed, the question becomes, what's still down there? What's still operating right now beneath our feet while we go about our daily lives completely unaware? The CIA says the Kennedy facility was decommissioned, but they've lied before. They've classified operations as closed while continuing them under different names. They've destroyed evidence, manipulated records, and convinced the public that documented facts were conspiracy theories until they could no longer maintain the fiction. The truth is, we may never know the full extent of what happened 400 feet below the Kennedy estate. We may never see the complete files or hear testimony from everyone who worked there. But what we do know is enough to fundamentally change how we view American history. The decisions that sent soldiers to war, that toppled governments, that shifted the balance of global power, weren't always made in the Oval Office or the halls of Congress. Sometimes they were made in underground rooms by people whose names we'll never know, pursuing agendas we never voted on, using methods that would horrify us if we understood them fully. This declassification is a reminder that the official story is often just the beginning. Beneath the surface, sometimes literally, there's always more, and the people in power will always fight to keep it hidden for as long as they possibly can. The Kennedy estate still stands, a monument to American royalty and the mythology of Camelot, but now we know what it really was: a fortress, a command center. A place where the future was engineered by people who believed they knew better than democracy what America needed. Whether you think that makes them patriots or traitors probably depends on whether you believe the ends justify the means. But one thing is certain: history wasn't what they taught us in school. It was written 400 feet underground in the dark by people who made sure we'd never know their names. The question that haunts us now is whether we're truly seeing the complete picture or if we're just scratching the surface of something far more expansive. The CIA's reluctant acknowledgement of the Kennedy estate facility represents a calculated decision to release information they could no longer contain rather than a genuine commitment to transparency. Multiple FOIA requests have revealed that similar documents regarding other underground installations are still being withheld, with declassification dates pushed back to 2045, 2067, and even beyond. Why would the government need to keep secrets about Cold War infrastructure for another 20 years if those operations have truly ended? The answer lies in understanding that these facilities weren't just built for one administration or one specific purpose. What the declassified documents subtly reveal is that the underground complex beneath the Kennedy estate was part of a continuity system designed to ensure that certain operations and agendas would persist regardless of electoral outcomes. Think about that for a moment. Your vote for president matters, we're told. The will of the people shapes the direction of the nation. Yet if crucial decisions affecting foreign policy, military intervention, and intelligence operations were being made in classified chambers by unelected officials, then the democratic process becomes little more than theater. The people running those underground facilities were answerable not to voters, but to institutional power structures that transcend individual administrations. Former intelligence officials who have spoken on the record since the declassification have hinted at something even more troubling. The facility wasn't just a command center for executing predetermined plans. It was apparently a think tank for developing new strategies and methodologies that would later be implemented across the globe. The behavioral architects and narrative engineers mentioned in the personnel files weren't there to execute orders from above. They were there to invent the methods and messages that would shape public perception and influence world events. In essence, the Kennedy Estate underground complex may have been a laboratory where techniques were tested before being deployed on the American people and populations worldwide. The document inventory lists reference extensive research into what was termed narrative construction and perception architecture. This wasn't propaganda in the traditional sense where you simply lie to people. This was something far more sophisticated. It was the deliberate crafting of information environments where certain truths become invisible not because they're suppressed, but because the intellectual framework for understanding them simply doesn't exist in the public consciousness. Think about how you learn what you know. You rely on news sources, educational institutions, conversations with peers. What if those channels were subtly shaped not through crude censorship but through the architecture of how information itself flows? That's what the research files suggest was happening. The CIA's incomplete declassification also reveals that the Kennedy family's relationship to the underground facility was far more complicated than simple ignorance. Several passages in the released documents discuss briefings given to family members, discussions about legacy and responsibility, and references to family members being brought into conversations about national security matters. This raises the possibility that the Kennedy family wasn't merely hosting a government operation beneath their property. They may have been active participants in a system that gave them access to intelligence and influence that ordinary citizens could never possess. How does that change our understanding of the Kennedy presidency and the subsequent Kennedy family political trajectory? There's also the curious matter of what happened to the facility's records after the decommissioning process. The CIA claims everything was removed and properly archived, yet independent researchers have discovered evidence suggesting that certain sections were sealed rather than cleaned. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted by academics in 2023 indicate that beneath the main excavation area, there are additional chambers that don't appear on any of the official floor plans. These appear to be significantly deeper, possibly extending down 600 feet or more. The CIA has refused to comment on these findings, which in itself is telling. If everything was decommissioned, why not simply confirm or deny the existence of additional chambers? The strategic significance of the location itself is worth examining more closely. Hyannis Port sits on the Atlantic coast, making it ideal for both domestic command operations and coordination with allied intelligence services overseas. The area's proximity to major transportation hubs, its relative isolation from major urban centers that might harbor hostile intelligence operatives, and its ability to be accessed discreetly all made it an ideal location. But there's something else. The Kennedy family's prominence and the public's fascination with them meant that the compound itself was constantly in the news, constantly discussed, constantly being photographed from public vantage points. In a way, the most secret place was hidden in plain sight because everyone was looking at the surface story of America's most glamorous family, while the real operations happened 400 feet below. What's particularly striking about the declassified material is what it tells us about continuity in American governance during the Cold War and beyond. The facility remained operational across 8 different presidential administrations spanning both parties. Presidents came and went, policy agendas shifted, yet the facility continued, its operations evolving but never ceasing. This suggests that whoever controlled access to the facility had the ability to brief new presidents and shape their understanding of what was possible and necessary in foreign policy. A new president arrives in the Oval Office thinking they'll change American foreign policy. But then they're taken to secure locations and shown intelligence about threats, operations already in progress, assets in place around the world. The psychological weight of that knowledge, combined with the institutional machinery already in motion, tends to constrain presidential choices considerably. The documents also reference something called the Continuity Council, a group whose membership was apparently fixed and didn't change with administrations. The names of most council members are redacted, but the released portions indicate they held positions in military intelligence, the CIA, the State Department, and the defense industry. They apparently met quarterly, sometimes monthly, and their discussions centered on long-term strategic objectives that would span decades. This wasn't about responding to crises or adapting to changing world conditions. This was about maintaining a consistent trajectory toward objectives that had been established long before most of these officials even entered government service. If such a structure actually existed and functioned as the declassified fragments suggest, it represents a profound challenge to the American democratic system. The Constitution grants ultimate authority to the President, Congress, and the courts. Yet if crucial decisions affecting war and peace, foreign relations, and the allocation of vast resources were being made by unelected officials who answered to no one, then the formal structures of government become merely decorative. Power flows not through constitutional channels but through institutional relationships, shared interests, and classified information available only to the initiated. The ongoing withholding of the remaining 60% of the documentation is perhaps the most important part of this entire story. The government has acknowledged the existence of the facility. They've released enough information to confirm what conspiracy theorists have been saying, but they're keeping the rest classified indefinitely. This selective revelation serves multiple purposes. It allows them to appear transparent while actually maintaining control over the most sensitive information. It diverts attention from current operations by focusing public concern on historical ones. And it sets the expectation that there are legitimate reasons for government secrecy, making it harder to challenge classification decisions about ongoing activities. We should consider what this means for understanding current events. If similar facilities exist today, if a continuity council or equivalent structure is still functioning, then the political drama we see on the news might be partially or entirely theatrical. Elections might matter less than we think. Policy debates in Congress might be secondary to decisions made in undisclosed locations by people we'll never know. The very concept of representative democracy depends on the idea that the public can influence government through voting and participation. If substantial governmental power operates outside public view and public accountability, then we're not living in a democracy at all, regardless of what the textbooks say. This doesn't necessarily mean that the people running these hidden systems are evil or that everything they do is malicious. Many of them likely believe they're protecting the nation from threats the public couldn't comprehend. Many probably view democracy as a useful fiction, necessary for social stability but incompatible with the hard decisions required to navigate international power politics. They might not see themselves as enemies of the American people but as guardians protecting us from ourselves, from our own naivety and short-sightedness. This kind of thinking has been used to justify countless atrocities throughout history, but that doesn't make it any less prevalent among people in positions of power. What the Kennedy estate declassification should teach us is skepticism about official narratives combined with humility about what we can ever truly know. There will always be more to the story than what's publicly available. There will always be classified information, some of which genuinely relates to legitimate security concerns and some of which relates to covering up embarrassing or illegal activities. Our challenge as citizens is to maintain enough critical thinking to question official accounts while avoiding the trap of assuming every declassification is complete truth and every redaction is a smoking gun. The story of the Kennedy Estate underground complex ultimately tells us something crucial about the nature of power in America. Power doesn't reside solely where we think it does. It doesn't operate only through the channels we're taught to respect. Instead, it flows through institutions, relationships, and secret spaces that most of us will never access or even fully understand. The government that we can see and vote on and debate is only part of the picture. Behind it operates a deeper government that functions according to its own logic and its own rules. This doesn't mean we should despair or give up on the democratic process entirely. Rather, it should inspire us to remain vigilant, to question authority when appropriate, and to recognize that historical understanding is always incomplete. We're looking at 400 feet of declassified secrets that took decades to emerge. How much more remains hidden? How many other facilities exist that we know nothing about? How many operations are ongoing right now that we won't learn about for another 60 years? The most important takeaway from all of this is that you shouldn't trust claims of transparency from institutions that have spent decades deceiving the public. You shouldn't accept that history as we're taught it is necessarily accurate. And you should recognize that understanding power in America requires looking beyond the surface political drama to the institutional structures that persist regardless of which politicians hold office. The Kennedy estate secret is now partially in the open, but countless other secrets remain buried in classified vaults and redacted documents. Truth, it seems, isn't something governments willingly hand over. It's something we have to demand, push for, and piece together from fragments that they can no longer keep hidden.